I'm Emily. The room was thick with an uncomfortable silence, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock and the distant hum of traffic. I sat forward on the couch, my notebook balanced on my knees, while my husband, David, sat beside me, his hands clasped so tightly that his knuckles shone white. Across from us, in her armchair, sat David's mother, Mrs. Thompson, her shoulders draped in a shawl, a crumpled tissue between her fingers. I took a deep breath and began, my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. I've been keeping track of every dollar that's left this apartment for the last year and a half. Mrs. Thompson's eyes flickered, and her lips parted in a soft gasp. Emily, really, this is unnecessary, she said. David raised a hand, his gaze locked on me. Go on, he said. I flipped to the first page of the notebook. David transfers $1,500 to you every month automatically, I said. I turned the page. On average, we spend $600 on groceries and care packages for you. And then there are the so-called emergencies, like the $500 here and $400 there. All urgent, all immediate. I held up the notebook so David could see the neat columns of dates and numbers. Do you realize, David? We've given her over $70,000 in less than 2 years. David's breath caught. His eyes darted to his mother, searching for denial or an explanation. Mrs. Thompson dabbed delicately at her eyes. Every penny of it was for survival, medicine, heat, rent. You know how cruel winters are in this city, she said. I took a photo from the notebook and slid it across the coffee table. This was last Tuesday at the Grand View, a high-end restaurant. You and Mr. Harris, enjoying a meal of steak and lobster. The bill was over $400, and I saw him tip $100 like it was nothing. Mrs. Thompson flinched, her fingers tightening around the tissue. That wasn't me, she stammered. I leaned in, my voice low but sharp. I was in the same dining room, Mrs. Thompson. I ordered a salad and watched you laugh over wine. I heard him say he gives you $2,000 every week. David's head snapped toward his mother. Mom, he said. Mrs. Thompson's gaze flicked between us, trapped. She gave a brittle laugh. You must have misheard. People say things in restaurants. Numbers get tossed around. I pulled out another page from the notebook, a pharmacy receipt. The medication you said cost $280. The generic version, with the exact same active ingredient, costs only $18. I confirmed it with the pharmacist. I laid the receipt beside the photo. Evidence piling up like stones. Mrs. Thompson's breath hitched. Sometimes the body needs the best. You wouldn't understand. And Mr. Harris, he's just a friend helping with small things. $2,000 a week is not a small thing, I snapped, my voice cracking under the weight of my held-back fury. David rubbed his temples, his face ashen. Why didn't you tell me, Mom? Why let me believe you had nothing? That you needed me to keep the lights on? Mrs. Thompson's composure faltered. Her hands trembled, and the tissue shredded between her fingers. Because I wanted to protect you, she whispered. You've always been so generous, so good. If you knew Mr. Harris was helping, you'd have stopped. And I couldn't. I couldn't lose your care. I stared at her, stunned. Care? You've drained us dry. We can barely make rent, and you've been living like a queen on 2 incomes. Mrs. Thompson's voice rose, shrill with desperation. Do you know what it's like to be my age? To be invisible? Mr. Harris makes me feel alive again. And you? You've never understood what family owes. David's shoulders sagged. He looked at his mother as if seeing her for the first time, not as the fragile widow in need of rescue, but as a woman skilled at wearing masks. You've been lying to me, he said. Mrs. Thompson shook her head violently. No, Yes, David cut in, his words sharp. The pipe burst, the medicine, the utilities, all lies, and I fell for them all. Silence crashed down. I closed the notebook gently, but the sound was loud in the stillness. David leaned back, his eyes hollow. You made me believe you were one step away from losing everything. And all the while, you were collecting from him, from me, from anyone you could. You weren't surviving, Mom. You were taking. Mrs. Thompson's lips quivered, but no excuse came. I reached across the couch and touched David's arm. For the first time, he didn't recoil from the evidence I presented. His gaze lingered on the photographs, the receipts, the ledger of numbers. Slowly, painfully, the blind faith that had defined him began to crumble. To understand how we got here, I have to go back. David and I lived in a small apartment in the city. Our budget was tight, and every month, we struggled to make ends meet. I remember counting the bills in my worn-out wallet, just like I was counting my breaths during a panic. 2 5s, 3 1s, and a few coins that clinked against the lining. Payday was still days away. On the counter beside my wallet lay a grocery list that I had edited 3 times. I had crossed out anything that felt like a luxury: berries, good coffee, deli turkey. All that was left were milk, eggs, bread, and the cheapest pasta. David's voice came from the hall. You ready? Mom's been calling since 8. She sounded tired this morning. I think a good cake would cheer her up. I knew the unspoken tax of these visits. I smoothed a curl behind my ear and forced my shoulders to loosen. The gourmet market? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Yes, David said, brightening. They have that chocolate cake she loves. I thought of the price of that cake, a number that would swallow a big chunk of our meager funds. Sure, I said, wishing the word didn't feel like surrender. We drove through the city, past old brick storefronts and narrow stoops. The wipers squeaked across the windshield, misted with a light drizzle. David drove with a kind of focused hopefulness, as if keeping the car steady could keep everything else steady too. How's the budget looking? He asked softly at a red light. We're fine, I said, another even-toned word. I glanced at him, taking in the familiar kindness of his profile, his stubborn optimism. He was a good man, always had been, but sometimes his goodness leaned too hard in one direction. When we got to the gourmet market, the doors parted with a breath of warm air and the smell of sugar. A display of cakes glittered under glass. David went straight to the case, like he was being called by name. He pointed to a large cake. She'll love this, he said. It's a lot of cake, I said gently. She can freeze slices, David offered cheerfully. Or we can invite the neighbors. I nodded. Okay, I said, the words scraping a little this time. While the clerk boxed the cake with a fancy ribbon, I drifted to the end cap where paper towels were on sale. I did the math of coupons against my pride and decided to wait for payday. At the checkout, the cashier, a friendly middle-aged woman named Mrs. Jenkins, greeted us. Someone's celebrating, she said, sliding the cake box across the scanner. My mom, David said, leaning in a little. Thought we'd surprise her. Mrs. Jenkins's smile warmed. Your mom, Mrs. Thompson, has a sweet tooth. She's in here every week. And that gentleman she comes in with, what a charmer. He treats her like a queen. A tiny click sounded in my head, like a door unlatched without anyone touching it. I'm sorry, I asked, keeping my tone level. Mrs. Jenkins didn't notice the shift. She kept talking. She's just lovely. The coat, the hair, the perfume, like a movie star. And he always pays with a gold card and tips the baggers generously. David's smile paused, but he quickly recovered. My mother and him? He asked. Mrs. Jenkins nodded. Tall, gray-haired, very classy. They pick up the nice things: imported cheese, good coffee, those little jars of jam. I keep meaning to ask what brand of perfume she wears. The register spat out a total that felt heavy. I reached for my wallet out of reflex, then remembered and let my hand fall. David had already taken out his card. As we walked out of the store, David carried the cake box carefully, like he had carried our nephew at a christening. I matched his pace, our steps falling into an automatic rhythm. But at the curb, the rhythm broke. "She must be mistaking her for someone else," David said, trying to sound light. "Maybe," I said. I opened the passenger door and sat down, my bag on my lap, my hands on the zipper as if it could keep something closed inside me. In my mind, the picture Mrs. Jenkins had painted hung there like a framed photograph: gray hair, a fur coat, perfume, a man with a gold card. I tried to compare it with the image I had of Mrs. Thompson, a woman in a faded sweater, complaining about the high heat bill and the loneliness. The two images wouldn't fit together. After that, things started to add up. One day, David got a call from his mother. "Her utilities are $800 this month," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "The heating in that old building is brutal." I froze. $800 for a one-bedroom in this neighborhood? "David, we pay barely half that here, and our apartment isn't new either." David's eyes darted toward me, wary. "She's 75, M. She can't sit in the cold. Maybe she keeps it warmer than we do, or the building charges a flat rate." I inhaled slowly, trying to calm myself. I thought of the receipt book in my drawer, already filled with entries of money sent to his mother. I wanted to say she was lying, but I swallowed the words back. Instead, I asked softly, "Do you know if she showed you the bill?" David hesitated. "She doesn't need to show me. She wouldn't make something like that up." I almost laughed, but the sound would have been bitter. I remembered the image of Mrs. Thompson in the store, looking so well dressed and cared for. David's faith in his mother was a wall I couldn't climb. "Okay," I whispered, nodding. "If you think it's right." That night, after David fell asleep, I opened my notebook and added a new line: $800 utilities. My pen pressed so hard that the paper almost tore. I lay awake, staring at the numbers, feeling the money bleed from our account like a slow, deliberate wound. I decided to do some investigating. One Wednesday, I called in sick to work. I left the apartment just after dawn, my notebook tucked in my bag, and drove to Mrs. Thompson's neighborhood. I parked 2 blocks away and walked to a corner cafe opposite her building. I ordered the cheapest coffee on the menu and took a window seat. From there, I had a clear view of her front door. Minutes stretched into hours. I sipped the bitter coffee and tried not to fidget. I felt half like a detective and half like a trespasser in my own family. At 10:47, the building's front door creaked open. Mrs. Thompson emerged, transformed. Instead of her usual cardigan, she was wearing a cream-colored cashmere coat, a silk scarf neatly tied under her chin, and her hair was styled in a way no cheap apartment mirror could achieve. My stomach clenched. She tapped her phone, and within minutes, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. A driver stepped out and opened the door for her. She slid in with the grace of someone who expected such treatment. I tossed a few bills on the table and hurried outside. I hailed a taxi. "Follow that car," I told the driver. My voice trembled, but the driver just shrugged and pulled into traffic. The car took us to the Grand View, a posh restaurant overlooking the city. I got out a block away and lingered outside, my nerves buzzing. Then I pushed through the glass doors into a world of soft jazz and polished wood. I requested a table at the far side of the dining room, saying I was waiting for a friend. I ordered the cheapest salad on the menu and clutched the menu like a shield. From my seat, I could see Mrs. Thompson at a table near the center of the room, sitting across from Mr. Harris. Mr. Harris's presence filled the space. His tailored suit gleamed against the white tablecloth, and his watch flashed under the light with every movement. The waiter poured wine into crystal glasses, a deep red that left slow trails along the glass. Mrs. Thompson lifted her glass with elegance, her laugh ringing out. I leaned in, pretending to study my phone, my ears straining. Amid the murmur of voices and the clinking of cutlery, I heard Mr. Harris say, $2,000 a week, as always. My fork slipped against the plate, the sound sharp enough to make me flinch. I lowered my gaze quickly, praying no one noticed. $2,000 a week, $8,000 a month, more than triple what David and I made after paying our bills. Mrs. Thompson's smile widened as she tilted her glass toward him. You're too generous, she purred, her eyes glittering with satisfaction. I felt heat rise in my chest, my hand trembling as I picked at my salad. The waiter brought their food, seared steak, lobster tails, and sides arranged like artwork. I glanced at the menu. Each entree was at least $60. With appetizers, wine, dessert, and coffee, I estimated the bill would be over $400. When the check arrived, Mr. Harris slipped out a sleek black card and added a $100 tip without hesitation. My throat tightened. That tip alone could have covered our electric bill for a month. I forced myself to breathe evenly and waited until my own plate was cleared. I asked for the check, signing it with hands that felt foreign. My total was $16.90 with tax and tip, and even that stung. I rose slowly, tucking my notebook under my arm. On the page inside, I had written, The Grand View, $2,000 a week, $400 meal, $100 tip. I walked out into the cold, the wind biting through my coat. I took photos of the restaurant and the car, pressing the images into my memory as evidence. Then I turned away and walked back to my car, the notebook heavy in my bag. A few days later, on a Sunday evening, just after dinner, David's phone rang. He answered it, his voice softening as soon as he heard his mother's name. I watched his expression shift from mild fatigue to alarm. What? Slow down, Mom. Tell me exactly what happened, he said, pressing a palm to his forehead. The bathroom pipe burst, flooded into the neighbor's apartment. $4,000 in damages, he said, his chair scraping back from the table. My stomach sank. This was the kind of sum that could break us. David covered the receiver and turned to me, panic in his eyes. She says the water poured down into the unit below. The neighbors are demanding immediate payment for repairs. She doesn't have the money. I'll transfer it tonight. I steadied my breath. David, wait. You're going to send thousands of dollars without even seeing it. She might be lying. She wouldn't make this up, he shot back, his voice tight. She sounded terrified. I countered, all the more reason to check. If the pipe really burst, there should be water everywhere. Let's drive over tonight. David hesitated, torn between loyalty and reason. It's late. I said, so, is wiring $4,000 that we can't spare? Finally, David grabbed his coat. Fine, but only so she doesn't panic. We drove through the streets, the city lights casting fractured reflections on the wet asphalt. David's jaw was clenched, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. I sat rigid in the passenger seat, clutching my notebook. When we reached Mrs. Thompson's building, the hallway smelled of disinfectant. She opened the door before we knocked, her face a mask of anguish. Oh, thank God, she cried. It was a disaster. Water everywhere. I don't know how I'll ever pay Mr. Johnson downstairs. He's threatening to call a lawyer. I stepped past her without a word and walked straight to the bathroom. I flipped on the light. The floor was dry, the tiles clean. There was no sign of water damage, no warped wood, no damp towels. The air smelled faintly of cleaner, not mildew. I crouched down to examine the pipes under the sink. They were shiny and intact, no sign of a recent break. Behind me, Mrs. Thompson's voice wavered from the living room. I cleaned up as best I could. You wouldn't believe the mess. I straightened up slowly. David, come look, I called, my tone sharp. He appeared in the doorway, confusion shadowing his face. His eyes swept over the spotless room. Mom, where's the damage? Mrs. Thompson wrung her hands. I scrubbed for hours. You know how quickly I can get things tidy. I bit back a bitter laugh. A burst pipe doesn't vanish with scrubbing. The floor would be soaked, the walls stained. And if it leaked into the apartment below, let's ask the neighbor. Mrs. Thompson flinched. That's not necessary. But I was already on my way. I marched down the stairwell, my footsteps echoing. David followed reluctantly. On the floor below, I knocked.